Hey everyone, and welcome back to Gilbert Zoo! Last week we truly spared no expense as we officially opened our gates to the public after unveiling Coyote Canyon, the very first exhibit in the zoo and along the Great State 48 Trail. Starting off this week though, our finances are running a little low, so today's goal is pretty simple. We need to give guests more reason to stay longer, explore more of the zoo, and hopefully help Gilbert Zoo move closer to profitability. But before we dive too deep into today's episode, I want to show you something I've been working on behind the scenes. I spent some time in Adobe Illustrator creating a map for Gilbert Zoo. Admittedly, the zoo is still pretty small right now, but I thought it was such a fun addition because real zoos have maps posted throughout their parks and it adds a little extra realism to the game. I'll be updating the map throughout the series, and honestly I can't wait to watch it grow alongside the zoo itself. And if you're enjoying the Gilbert Zoo series so far, I'd really appreciate it if you liked the video and subscribed to the channel. We're building the zoo one episode at a time, and there's still so much that I want to add as the park continues to grow. And speaking of the future, I also wanted to future-proof Coyote Canyon a little more in hopes that our pack continues to grow. Right now, the coyotes don't have enough navigable space for future cubs, so I pushed the wall back a bit and removed some bushes that were interfering with their pathing. I definitely underestimated how much room a coyote pack needs to roam, so hopefully these changes will help them feel a little more comfortable in their habitat. I decided to leave this update in the video because as a perfectionist, it can sometimes be difficult to admit when an exhibit didn't turn out exactly right the first time. One thing Planet Zoo has really been teaching me is that it's completely okay to revisit older builds and continue improving them over time. Honestly, it's pretty rare to get everything perfect on the first attempt. So if you've ever felt the same way while building in Planet Zoo, consider this your encouragement to go back, make adjustments, and create something you feel even happier with. For now though, I need to turn my attention to another exhibit so guests have a reason to stay a little longer. I wanted to stay on theme and continue building out the abandoned mine site. Historically, many Arizona boomtowns were built dangerously close to mine entrances because transporting valuable ore before the expansion of railways was incredibly difficult. Because of that, I wanted to create a very obvious mine entrance sitting right next to the boomtown itself. I've also really been wanting to build a small Arizona reptile house alongside the Great State 48 Trail featuring native animals like the western diamondback rattlesnake and the Gila monster. The problem was that I wanted this area to feel visually different from the wooden boomtown boardwalk we already created. Truthfully, there also aren't many exhibit animals in Planet Zoo that actually live in Arizona, so a classic reptile house felt like it might look pretty empty at this stage. Instead, I decided to build a mine entrance large enough for guests to walk through, with the western diamondback rattlesnake living deeper inside the mine. Due to our current financial constraints and the limited space I'm working with, this build is only going to feature the rattlesnake, but I do still plan on adding the Gila monster somewhere along the Great State 48 Trail later on. I started by placing the pathing first, which helped me visualize the space and plan out the cavern I wanted to dig. Having the western diamondback rattlesnake live in the mine also gave me an opportunity to tie in another real historical detail. Arizona is actually considered the rattlesnake capital of the United States, hosting 13 of the country's 16 rattlesnake species. Snakes like the western diamondback rattlesnake often seek shelter in the cool, dark environments created by abandoned mines throughout the state. Construction for the mine was relatively simple. I started by placing concrete walls as a reference for how large the cavern needed to be, then began working around them. I slightly buried the exhibit space in the walls so I could get a better idea of the scale, and that gave me a solid foundation for the rest of the build. One small detail that made a surprisingly big impact was changing the pathing to be invisible and using the terrain brush to paint the floor so it looked more rocky and natural. I really love how that turned out because it helps the whole space feel less like a regular Planet Zoo path and more like guests are actually walking into an old mine. Speaking of rocks, the mine itself was mostly simple rock work. I wanted the cavern to stay fairly square, so I had enough room to place decorations inside for guests to enjoy. To make that work, I used desert rock cladding on the grid, which made it easy to copy and paste pieces across the walls. This gave the mine a really nice texture without making the layout too difficult to manage. I spent a lot of time making sure the rock work looked just right, and once the walls were finished, I completed the mine by using more rock cladding for the ceiling and then burying the structure into the terrain. I also placed some decorations outside the mine entrance to continue building out the abandoned mine site Vista Point. This helped tie the whole build back into the boomtown and made it feel like the mine had been there the whole time, instead of looking like something that had just been dropped next to the boardwalk. At this point, I feel like the mine is largely complete, and I honestly love how it turned out. To help bring more guests over to the mine entrance, I decided to build another small saloon with a gulpy energy inside. This build was done in a similar style to the boardwalk, using a lot of wooden pieces to keep everything feeling connected. I also created a small facade on the front of the building, which was commonly used in Western architecture to make smaller buildings look taller and more impressive. With a few decorations here and there, this should hopefully help draw guests closer to the rattlesnake mine and make this side of the boomtown feel a little more alive. After that, I went back and forth for a really long time about what to build next. Right now, most of our guests are still congregating around the boardwalk on the Great State 48 Trail, and I want to start giving them more reasons to spread out throughout the zoo. Up until this point, I've truly spared no expense on Gilbert Zoo. I've tried to make every area as detailed and beautiful as I possibly could. Unfortunately, rattlesnakes and coyotes are not bringing in enough guests to financially sustain the zoo on their own, so I need to add another animal sooner rather than later. Because our finances are still extremely tight, I decided that our next habitat needed to be more practical. Not careless, and definitely not unrealistic, but practical. I needed something that could meet the animals' needs, give guests another reason to explore, and avoid pushing the zoo even deeper into debt. Since I'm trying to build Gilbert Zoo as realistically as I can, my options felt pretty limited. Smaller Arizona animals would realistically need protection from natural predators like hawks and vultures, which means I would probably need to net off the top of the habitat. At this point, that kind of netting is just too expensive for the zoo. After a lot of back and forth, I finally decided to prepare an area for the collared peccary, also known as the javelina. They still fit the Arizona theme really well, they don't require an expensive fully netted enclosure, and they give us a chance to add another native desert species to the Great State 48 Trail while keeping the build practical for where the Gilbert Zoo is financially right now. I'm actually really excited to build for the javelina, even if this is only going to be a more basic habitat for now. I always planned on adding javelinas to Gilbert Zoo, specifically somewhere along the Great State 48 Trail, but I'll admit, the timing caught me a little off guard. Javelinas are one of those animals that feel instantly familiar if you live in Arizona, but they are a lot more interesting than people sometimes give them credit for. They are common throughout much of central and southern Arizona today, living in herds, relying heavily on their sense of smell, and using shaded washes and scrubby areas to escape the heat. For Gilbert Zoo, they give us a practical native species with plenty of personality and a strong connection to the Arizona landscape. Since javelinas are natural foragers, a realistic javelina habitat probably would not look perfectly manicured. These animals would browse through low vegetation, dig through the soil, and make the space feel a little rough around the edges. That creates an interesting challenge in Planet Zoo because collared peccaries still need a decent amount of plant coverage inside the habitat. Eventually, I'll probably solve that with raised planters, protected planting areas, and rock work that keeps some of the greenery just out of reach. For now though, this is a budget-friendly habitat, so we're working with what the zoo can afford. While I was building the habitat for the javelinas, something incredible happened. Our coyotes had cubs. I absolutely love these little pups, and I'm so glad I spent some time future-proofing their habitat earlier in the episode. The cubs are adorable, and I honestly spent way too much time just watching them explore Coyote Canyon. Coyotes are social animals that live in family packs, typically led by a mated pair. Their offspring can remain part of the pack even as they mature, which means I need to start thinking seriously about the future of this group. At some point, I'll either need to expand the coyote habitat again or transfer some of the offspring to another zoo. I don't think there's a strong conservation need to release these coyotes into the wild, and I also don't think zoo-bred coyotes would be the best candidates for release. So for now, I'm going to enjoy having these cubs in the habitat, but this is definitely something we'll need to manage carefully as Gilbert Zoo continues to grow. Back to the javelina habitat, and at this point their exhibit is officially operational. Notice I did not say complete. The goal here was never to build the final version of this habitat. The goal was to make a smart, realistic decision while Gilbert Zoo is still struggling financially. The javelinas have the space, shelter, and basic habitat needs covered, and guests now have another reason to explore this side of the zoo. Once the zoo is in a better financial position, I want to come back and give the collared peccaries a more detailed desert habitat with better rockwork, protected planting areas, and a stronger sense of place. For now though, this is exactly what Gilbert Zoo needs, a practical step forward that helps the zoo grow. The javelinas helped, but they were not quite enough to turn the zoo around on their own. Gilbert Zoo is closer to profitability than it has ever been, but we still need one more strong addition to financially stabilize the park. So, as much as I wanted to avoid taking on more debt, I think the next step is going to require a medium-sized loan. The goal is not to just spend money for the sake of expanding. The goal is to introduce another animal that can bring more guests into the zoo, spread people out beyond the Great State 48 Trail, and hopefully push us closer to profitability. For that next animal, we're going to add African spurred tortoises to the right side of the entrance. This will be the first species at Gilbert Zoo that is not native to Arizona, so it is definitely a shift for the park. But based on what I've read about African spurred tortoises, I think they should do really well in the hot, dry setting of our Arizona zoo. Even though they are not part of the Great State 48 Trail, they still feel like a practical choice for Gilbert Zoo right now. They fit the climate, they should be relatively affordable compared to some of the other animals I considered, and they give our guests another reason to spend some time near the entrance instead of heading straight toward the east side of the zoo. Since the African spurred tortoises are going to be on the opposite side of the park, I also want to include more guest facilities nearby. If we want guests to spend time over here, they need access to things like bathrooms, food, and water without having to walk all the way across the park. The African spurred tortoise should be pretty comfortable in the dry heat of Arizona, but since they are reptiles, they need spaces where they can regulate their body temperature. I want to give them a small outdoor yard where they can enjoy the sunshine, but also a sizable indoor section with shade, shelter, and cooler areas where they can retreat when they need to. African spurred tortoises are endangered, so they also give Gilbert Zoo another opportunity to focus on conservation. I would love to eventually breed these tortoises and contribute to the species in a meaningful way. For now, I'm planning to start with just 2 tortoises, one male and one female, because males can become territorial, especially around breeding. This species is threatened by habitat loss, overcollection for the pet trade, and other similar pressures. Realistically though, conservation is a lot more complicated than just breeding animals in a zoo and releasing them somewhere in their native habitat. Zoos would need to work with official conservation programs, make sure the animals are healthy and genetically appropriate, and prepare them for a carefully managed release. That is one of the reasons I'm really looking forward to the wildlife conservation sites in Planet Zoo 2. It sounds like the sequel will give us more opportunities to think about conservation in a way that feels more realistic, and I honestly cannot wait to bring Planet Zoo 2 to the channel. So, subscribe for that in the future. For now though, I wanted to give the tortoises a really beautiful rockwork archway as they transition between the indoor and outdoor sections of the habitat. Honestly, I found working with these rocks to be surprisingly relaxing. This habitat does not need to be enormous, but it does need to be large enough to feel comfortable and realistic. I also really do not want to revisit this habitat later for major upgrades, so I'm trying to make it as beautiful as possible from the beginning. African spurred tortoises do not need a heavily planted habitat, so instead of focusing on dense vegetation, I'm putting most of my attention into the rockwork, terrain, shelter, and overall structure of the space. For the guest area, I wanted the indoor viewing section to feel spacious, but still modest. I started by placing the pathing first, then worked the building and viewing areas around that layout. I also added some indoor decorations and educational details so guests have a reason to slow down, learn more about the tortoises, and spend a little bit more time in this part of the zoo. And with that, this exhibit is just about done. I'm really hoping that introducing African spurred tortoises to Gilbert Zoo will finally push us into profitability. Just look at this animal. I absolutely love these models. Frontier really knocked this one out of the park. The African spurred tortoise is also exciting because it gives us our first species for a brand new section of the zoo. It is not part of the Great State 48 Trail, but it helps Gilbert Zoo start expanding beyond Arizona wildlife and into a broader conservation theme. Aside from a few decorations around the building, the African spurred tortoise habitat is complete. So now let's take another look at the collared peccaries. I was surprised to see that our Javelina group has already grown, and among the babies is this beautiful leucistic Javelina. She is absolutely adorable, and I cannot wait to eventually give her and the rest of the group a much more interesting habitat to explore. Thankfully, that may not be too far away, because I'm happy to announce that Gilbert Zoo is finally profitable. We are still in debt, so we are definitely not out of the woods yet, but the zoo is finally bringing in more money than it is spending. Before we jump into our next major exhibit, I need to focus on paying down some of the debt we've built up along the way. It has taken a really long time to get to this point. In fact, enough time has passed that our African spurred tortoises have already had offspring of their own. It is really exciting to see the zoo continue to grow even through all of our financial struggles, and I love that Gilbert Zoo is now in a position to contribute to African spurred tortoises conservation efforts. We will not be releasing these babies into the wild just yet though. Before that could ever happen, we need to make sure they are truly prepared. The offspring would need time to grow, pass health screenings, be managed carefully from a genetic standpoint, and develop natural behaviors like grazing, burrowing, and regulating their body temperature. Eventually, they would also need to be transferred to a protected release site where they could be monitored over time. So for now, Gilbert Zoo's role is not immediate release. Our role is responsible breeding, education, and hopefully contributing to a larger conservation program in the future. Gilbert Zoo is still in debt, but for the first time it finally feels like this park has a future. So next time we'll keep building on that momentum, pay down some of what we owe, and start preparing for the next major build in the zoo. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you can follow along as Gilbert Zoo continues to grow. And speaking of growth, check out our newly updated map. I'm having way too much fun with this. Thanks again so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.